We're ready now to start looking at repetition in Java programs in CSC 120. And so this is a short video that will introduce the two major statements in Java that allow us to do repetition, the while statement and the for statement. Okay, so repetition is a very powerful technique. It allows us to generate large amounts of output with a small number of program statements because we will execute that small number of statements multiple or large number of times to produce lots of output. And so the key in this is to identify the general operation that's to be performed for each value in a data series. And then we will represent the values inside the body of the loop with a variable. And that variable will be initialized with the first value that we want from our data series. And then every time through the loop, we will update the variable so that it takes on the next value in the series that we're interested in. Okay, so the while loop or the while statement is the most general way to include repetition in a Java program. And so I have an example shown on this slide where we have a while statement, and inside the parentheses of the while statement is a Boolean expression or a true-false test that will determine whether or not we want to stay in the repetition, stay continually executing the body of the loop, or whether we want to exit the loop. So the meaning of the while statement, when we encounter the while statement the first time, we evaluate the Boolean expression inside parentheses. In other words, we figure out, is it true or false? If the expression is true, we execute the body of the loop once, and then we go back and test the condition again. If the second time we test the condition, it works out to be true, we execute the body of the loop and go back and test the condition again. So that's where the repetition comes in. Every time, or as long as the value of the Boolean expression is true, I'm going to be repeatedly executing the body of the loop. And the key to making this work is inside the body of the loop, I'm going to be updating the value of the variable that's being tested in the parentheses. So in this example, x is the control variable for the loop. That's the value of x is controlling whether or not I stay in the loop. So we initialize the value of x before we get to the while loop to 44. Then while, or as long as, x is greater than or equal to 30, I'm going to process the current value of x by printing it, and then I'm going to update the value of x by in this case, I'm subtracting 2 from x. So x would go from 44 to 42. I go back up, 42 is greater than or equal to 30, so I go through the loop a second time. And then x becomes 40 and 38 and 36 and so on and so forth. Okay. Oops, sorry. And it's important, you want to avoid writing a loop that never ends. So this idea of having a statement inside the body of the loop that changes the value of x is really important. So if we have the following example here, where inside the body of the loop the only thing I'm doing is printing x is never changing, so every time I go back and test 44 is greater than 30, yes, print another line with x equals 44. And then I go back, 44 still greater than 30. And so I'm going to be continually printing this over and over and over again, and it'll never stop. I'll have to exit out of the program using other means than having the program stop on its own. I have an example here in Java, and it's the same code, except instead of using the system out println, I'm using an output area, so it's easier to see when I run my example. And so if I run this program, okay, I have my executing code here, and if I execute the while loop, let me move it so you can see it. Okay, so here's the while loop that I'm going to, and if I click this button, it's going to execute this code. And notice that x starts at 44, and then that is greater than 30, so I print the value x equals 44. Then x becomes 42, and it's So I continually execute this. Now eventually when x is 30, I print x equals 30, x becomes 28, and when I go back to test the condition, 28 is no longer greater than or equal to 30, and so whenever the condition of a while loop is false, I fall out of the while loop and I execute the statement that follows the closing curly for the body of the loop, which is printing this line of equal signs here. Okay, so oops, didn't want to do that. So let's go back to my thing here. And right, what I wanted to say, it's very important when you are writing a loop, the control variable needs to be set to its initial value, and then we test that variable to see do we want to stay in the loop or not, and then we also want to update the value of the control variable. So there's really three things that are happening here. The first thing I'm doing is initializing the value of the control variable. The second thing I'm doing inside the loop is processing the current value of x, and then also inside the loop, before I end the loop, I have to make sure to update x to the next value it should have. Okay, very important. My example does that. Okay. Now, it turns out that these three parts to the repetition statement, the initializing, the testing, and the updating of the control variable, are so important that Java provides another statement that forces us to do all that at the same place in the program, inside the parentheses, after the keyword. So another kind of repetition statement, and the one that we are going to be using most often in CSC 120, is the for loop. And the for statement is similar to the while loop, but with some specific differences. Really, the main difference is that the initializing the control variable and the updating of the control variable are not done now where they were with the while loop. They're all done inside the parentheses here at the heading of the statement. So notice that inside the for loop heading, the parentheses, there are three things that are separated by semicolons. The initializing of x to a specific starting value, the testing of x to see do we want to stay in the loop or not, and then the update. So it's all in the heading there, so it's going to be harder to, it'll be more difficult to forget to do those things. So going back to NetBeans, I have another example. Here's a button that will do the same, it'll produce the same output, but using a for loop. So notice that inside the for loop, I'm going to start x at 44. I'm going to stay in the loop as long as x is greater than or equal to 30. And I'm going to update x by subtracting 2 from it every time through the loop. So if I go back to my program, I have this execute for loop button. And if I click that, notice that I get the same results that I did with the while loop. I added a couple tabs just for visual effect here. So there's 2 tabs. That's why these values are over to farther to the right. But notice that I print out the values from 44, the even numbers from 44 down to 30 in both examples. Okay, and then real quickly just to say, the format of the for statement makes it easy to specify all the information that we need to perform a repetition. So here's a last example. What do you think this for loop does? Okay, well, the control variable in this case is m, and it starts at 1. And then as long as m times m is less than 50, or like m squared is less than 50, I'm going to print a line. And then m++ would add 1 to m. So basically what this is going to do, it's going to print one line for each of the squares of integers starting at 1 where the square is less than 50. So I have that as a third button in my program. Let me just show you really quickly. Okay, oops. So here is the loop, and once again, instead of system.out.println, I used output area.append. And let's see the output of this for loop. You can sort of see it right there. If I click that, ta-dam. So I keep going as long as the square of the control variable is less than 50. So 7 times 7 is 49. That's less than 50. So I stay in the loop and print the line. But then when m becomes 8, 8 times 8 is 64, not less than 50. I don't print a line for 8 squared. Okay, so I hope that was